comment, and subscribe. And let's begin the journey of your true emergence. Chapter 1. The moment it broke, and why it had to happen that way. Gemini, your life didn't fall apart by accident. It broke at the exact point where you could no longer pretend. Not because you were weak, but because your soul refused to keep orbiting a life that no longer reflected your truth. You see, for a long time you mastered the art of juggling. Juggling people's expectations. Juggling roles, masks, identities. You told yourself, I'm adaptable. I can handle anything. But you weren't adapting. You were disappearing, bit by bit, word by word, choice by choice. And then it happened. Maybe it was a conversation that suddenly cut too deep. Maybe a job collapsed. A relationship dissolved. Or maybe, just maybe, it was subtler. A day when you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who you were holding together anymore. That moment was the break. But it wasn't destruction. It was extraction. The version of you who agreed to stay small was being shattered, so the real you could breathe again. Let me tell you about Darren, a Gemini architect from Chicago. For years, he worked at a prestigious firm, building skyscrapers, but shrinking inside. When the company restructured, he was laid off overnight. He told me later, I thought I'd lost everything, but what I lost was actually what I was hiding behind. In the months that followed, Darren didn't just switch careers. He started painting again. Something he hadn't touched since college. He opened a small gallery. And in the process, he realized, I wasn't fired. I was freed. Gemini, that's what your breaking was too. You weren't being punished. You were being realigned with a part of yourself that had grown too vibrant to stay caged. Because Mercury, your planetary ruler, isn't just a messenger. It's the transformer of meaning. And right now, Mercury is transiting a part of your chart that exposes what's been fragmented. It's showing you exactly what had to collapse so you could stop trying to keep things standing that were never meant to last. And yes, it hurt. Of course it did. Because breaking isn't just physical. It's energetic. It's the nervous system screaming, let go. It's the mind trying to cling to routines that no longer fit. It's the heart sobbing for things that felt safe, even if they were slowly suffocating your soul. But here's what no one told you. The pain was never the threat. The pretending was. And now, Gemini, you don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to smile through discomfort, or laugh when you want to scream, or say, it's fine, when your chest is breaking open from truth you haven't spoken. This moment, the one where you finally broke, is also the moment you finally got honest. So, ask yourself, what part of me was never really okay, even when everything looked fine? What identities have I been upholding just to feel accepted or useful? What was the role I was cast into that I now have permission to walk away from? Gemini, this isn't the end. It's the dismantling that makes space for true construction. And what comes next will not be built from pressure to perform. It will be born from your permission to be whole. Chapter 2. The rebuilding. Who you're becoming now that you're no longer performing. Gemini, here's what's wild about healing. It doesn't bring you back to normal. It takes you somewhere you've never been, but where you've always belonged. After the break, there's silence, stillness, and then something stirs. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but like a whisper beneath the rubble. You're still here, and that means something beautiful is trying to begin. You see, Gemini, ruled by Mercury, you've always been fast with reinvention. You're the shapeshifter of the zodiac. The quick thinker, the one who lands on your feet. But this time, rebirth isn't about reinvention. It's about reclamation. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering someone ancient. Someone you were before you learned to wear all those faces. Before the approval, the overachieving, the pleasing. This version of you, she doesn't hustle for belonging. He doesn't apologize for being too much. They don't explain their depth to people who only want the surface. Let me tell you about Samira, a Gemini from Atlanta. A well-liked therapist, always polished, always wise for others, but brittle in her own heart. When her long-term relationship imploded after years of slow erosion, she told no one. She kept showing up, kept smiling, kept nodding, until one afternoon, Mid-session with a client, she broke down, not from grief, but from the unbearable pressure of pretending she wasn't already breaking. That moment became her turning point. She stopped performing expertise and started reclaiming her own humanity. She took a sabbatical, traveled alone, journaled until her hands cramped. And when she came back, she didn't return to being the therapist. She returned as Samira, flawed, open, radiant. Her sessions became deeper, her friendships more honest, and her laughter? It finally sounded like her own. Gemini, the you that is rising now is not built on strategies. They are built on truth. And that truth begins with this vow. I will no longer shrink to fit the rooms I used to outgrow. Mercury, in this moment, is forming aspects that clear illusions, not only about the people around you, but the person you thought you had to be. This is the planetary signature of what ancient mystics called the return of voice. That voice isn't loud. It's clear. It doesn't demand. It declares. And in this next season, you'll begin to notice a rejection of people-pleasing that once felt like second nature, a desire for fewer conversations, but with more depth, a reawakening of old passions you shelved while being productive, a trust in your no, even when it disappoints others. This is reconstruction, not of your outer life, but of your inner center. And here's the irony. You'll still be Gemini, curious, expressive, multifaceted. But now, those expressions will rise from essence, not expectation. So I ask you, what part of you is trying to reintroduce itself now that the noise has stopped? What does authenticity feel like in your body, not just your words? Who are you when you're no longer narrating someone else's version of your life? Gemini, this rebuilding phase is sacred. It won't be fast. It won't be linear, but it will be true. And from truth, the kind of joy you've only glimpsed becomes possible. Chapter 3. The New Alignment. What arrives when you no longer betray yourself? Gemini, something subtle is shifting around you. Maybe you've already noticed it. Conversations feel different, silence feels safer, and your spirit no longer flinches when you choose yourself first. This is what happens when your inner world finally aligns with your outer one. You stop leaking energy into roles. You stop mistranslating your truth just to be palatable. You begin to radiate something that can't be faked. Energetic integrity. And that is magnetic. Mercury, your ruler, is in precise motion now, breaking contracts with confusion and guiding you to what astrologers call resonant paths. These aren't just new opportunities, they're soul-coded arrivals. Aligned friendships, honest relationships, unexpected collaborations that feel like destiny. But they only find you after the break, after you stop auditioning for a life that wasn't yours. Let me tell you about Tasha, a Gemini entrepreneur from Denver. After years of building a successful business, one she thought she loved, Tasha hit a wall. Not burnout, emptiness. The kind that no weekend getaway could fix. Her identity was wrapped around performance, accolades, the illusion of doing what she should. And then her partner left. Quietly, without drama. Just a note on the kitchen table. I don't know who you are anymore, and I think you don't either. It crushed her. And then it cracked her open. Within a year, Tasha dissolved the business, moved to a quieter town, and launched something wildly different. A retreat space for women in transition. She didn't promote it hard. She just lived it. And people came. Because when you live your truth, it calls those meant to walk beside you. Gemini, this is where you are now. You're not manifesting from desperation or proving. You're becoming a tuning fork, and what resonates will find you. Here's how you'll know you're stepping into the new alignment. You stop chasing. What's meant for you feels mutual. Your body becomes your compass. If it contracts, it's a no. If it opens, it's a yes. You're no longer afraid of disappointing people who are only attached to your performance. You crave fewer distractions. Depth becomes your default. You experience a wave of grief for the years you spent being everything to everyone but yourself. That grief is sacred. Let it move through. It's not weakness. It's release. Because Gemini, for the first time, you are no longer splintering to survive. You are integrating to thrive. You're not just walking away from what hurt. You're walking toward the people, places, and promises your soul had bookmarked long ago. So, ask yourself, what in your life now feels light, not because it's easy, but because it's true? Where are you being invited to stay rooted, even when your old self wants to run? How will you protect the peace you've earned from the storm you've outgrown? This chapter isn't about becoming someone new. It's about protecting who you've finally become. Chapter 4. The future that wants you now, living in the frequency of your rebirth. Gemini, you didn't just survive the fall. You evolved through it. And now, the future isn't something you chase. It's something you magnetize. Because here's the truth. Every version of you before now was necessary. The performer, the peacekeeper, the shapeshifter. They all had their place. They kept you safe, loved, accepted. But they were built for a world that no longer exists. The world that's opening to you now, it only recognizes truth. And not truth as performance. Not curated authenticity, but the raw, radiant, soul-shaking kind that doesn't need explanation. Gemini, Mercury is activating your solar 10th house of purpose and legacy. You're being invited into a completely different relationship with your life path, not one built on approval or algorithms, but on alignment. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be luminous. Let me tell you about Marcus, a Gemini filmmaker from Toronto. For years, he made client content, slick, successful, soulless. Then one day, his nephew, 6 years old, asked him, "Why don't you make the kind of movies you used to tell me in the dark when I was scared?" That night, Marcus wept. Not because of sadness, but because of remembrance. He wrote a short film that week, shot it on his phone. It was raw, clumsy, imperfect, and more him than anything he'd ever done. Months later, it was picked up by a festival. But that wasn't the real win. The win was this. He no longer needed permission to be honest. Gemini, that's your story too. You're not waiting for the green light anymore. You are the signal. You are the shift. You are the change you kept outsourcing to others. What's being rebuilt in you is not just personal. It's planetary. Every time you speak your truth, without spin or softening, you send a signal to the world. This is possible. This is what aliveness looks like. So I ask you now, what gifts have re-emerged through your healing? Gifts you once abandoned to be accepted. What creative, emotional, or spiritual expression is finally safe enough to return? How will you anchor this new identity when the world tries to hand you back your old mask? You see, Gemini, your rebirth isn't just a season. It's a frequency, a vibration you now live in. And that vibration is rewriting your relationships, your work, your sense of belonging. People will say you've changed, and you'll smile, because finally, it's true. You've changed because you're no longer performing at the speed of survival. You're now living at the rhythm of truth. And that rhythm? It's the sound of your soul coming home. Conclusion: you were never meant to stay broken. You were designed to rise whole. Gemini, your story was never about the fall. It was always about who you would become because of it. You didn't just survive. Something deeper happened. You remembered yourself. This journey didn't destroy you. It dismantled the illusions. It revealed the places where you were performing peace, managing perceptions, and editing your truth to stay acceptable. And now, you've chosen differently. You've chosen to be whole rather than agreeable, clear rather than careful, true rather than tolerated. You no longer explain your boundaries. You no longer negotiate your worth. You no longer chase understanding from those committed to misunderstanding you. Something sacred has returned to you. Not perfection, not closure, but power. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that speaks through presence, through discernment, through the quiet confidence of a soul that knows where it belongs. This is your new foundation. It's not built from approval or fear. It's built from truth. And from this place, everything changes. So I ask you now, are you ready to let the world meet the version of you that no longer hides, no longer shrinks, no longer waits to be chosen? Because you are no longer broken. You are becoming. And this time, nothing will pull you back.